Chapter 1. She protected the wounded beast. Everyone feared, only to learn it was the Alpha King in his wolf form. The blizzard came down like the sky itself had cracked open and decided to bury the world. Elara Voss fought through it with the stubbornness of someone who had nothing left to lose. Snow lashed her face, soaked the cuffs of her coat, and still she trudged the narrow trail that led from the frozen river to her solitary cabin on the ridge. 28 years old, running from a city that had chewed her up and spat her out, running from a fiancé who had taken everything, her savings, her trust, her name, and left her with nothing but debts and bruises hidden beneath long sleeves. Blackwood Ridge was supposed to be her hiding place, a crumbling inheritance from an aunt she barely remembered, no neighbors for 20 miles, no one to ask questions, just silence, pine, and the kind of cold that burned. She saw the wolf first as a shadow against the white, bigger than any animal had a right to be, black as spilled ink, lying half buried in a drift beside the woodpile. Blood steamed on the snow around it, bright and obscene. One massive paw twitched. A low, broken sound came from its throat, not quite a whine, not quite a growl. Elara should have kept walking. Everyone in the valley whispered about the monster that haunted these woods. Old Tom, the trapper who brought her firewood, had sworn on his mother's grave that the beast had taken down an entire hunting party 2 winters ago and left nothing but bones and boot leather. But the creature's eyes, molten gold even through the blowing snow, locked on hers, and something inside her chest cracked like thin ice. She dropped her pack, yanked the silver skinning knife from her belt, the one she kept because some threats weren't human, and approached slowly. "Easy," she whispered, voice trembling. "I'm not going to hurt you." The wolf bared teeth longer than her fingers, but it didn't rise. Couldn't. Its flank was torn open in 3 long gashes, deep enough to show bone. Something with claws bigger than a grizzly's had tried to gut it and failed. Elara's breath fogged between them. She should leave it, let nature take its course. Instead, she unbuckled her belt, looped it around the beast's bleeding neck like a leash, and began to drag 300 pounds of dying predator through the snow toward her porch. The wolf snarled once, a sound that rattled her teeth, then went limp, trusting or too weak to fight. Its blood soaked her coat, her arms, her soul. Old Tom found her an hour later, wrestling the unconscious creature over the threshold while the storm screamed outside. He took one look at the monster on her floorboards and went white as the snow. "Girl, that ain't no ordinary wolf. I know what they say it is." Elara cut in, voice raw. "It's hurt. Help me or get out." Tom cursed in 3 languages, but he helped. Together they heaved the beast onto the bearskin rug in front of the hearth. Up close, it was even more impossible. Taller than a mastiff at the shoulder, fur thick and black as midnight, muscles shifting beneath like living iron. Elara worked fast. Boiled water. Whiskey for disinfectant. Needle and gut thread. She cleaned the wounds while Tom held the massive head steady, muttering prayers under his breath. When she poured whiskey across the gashes, the wolf came awake with a roar that shook dust from the rafters. One paw lashed out. Claws raked the floorboards inches from her thigh. Tom stumbled back, crossing himself. But Elara didn't flinch. She met those burning gold eyes and said very softly, "You're safe. I've got you." The wolf stilled. Its sides heaved. Something almost human flickered behind the feral stare. Pain, gratitude, warning. Then it sagged again, unconscious. Tom fled into the storm the moment the stitches were done, swearing he'd never set foot on her land again. Elara stayed. She sat on the hearth, knees drawn to her chest, watching the firelight dance across the beast's blood-matted fur. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Outside, the storm kept raging, sealing them both inside with the scent of blood and pine and something wilder, something ancient that made her skin prickle and her heart beat too fast. She didn't know it yet, but she had just dragged the Alpha King of the Blackwood pack across her threshold, and nothing in her life would ever be safe again. Chapter 2. The Stranger at the Door. The storm had quieted to a low, mournful moan outside the cabin, wind rattling the frost-laced windows like fingers trying to get in. Elara Voss stood over the fire, arms wrapped tight around herself, staring at the man she had dragged in from the snow. He lay on the bearskin rug where she and old Tom had wrestled him hours ago, still unconscious, still too beautiful to be real. Moonlight slipped through the cracked shutters and painted silver across the sharp angles of his face. High cheekbones, a mouth cut with cruelty even in sleep. Black hair tangled and wet against his brow. His torn shirt had ridden up, exposing a stomach ridged with muscle and the faint white scars of old battles. Every breath lifted the broad wall of his chest like a warning. Elara's hands still trembled from stitching the gashes across his ribs. The wounds had been deep, ugly, deliberate, but already the edges were knitting closed in a way that made her stomach flip. No human healed like that. Not even close. She should have left him in the snow. Instead, she had hauled a monster into her home. A low groan rolled out of him. His head turned, thick lashes fluttering, and then those eyes opened, gold, bright, inhuman, fixed on her with the weight of a predator deciding whether prey was worth the chase. Elara's heart slammed against her ribs. She took one involuntary step back, the poker from the fireplace suddenly, heavy in her grip. He blinked slowly, the gold dimming to a stormy hazel as if he forced the beast down by sheer will. When he spoke, his voice was gravel and smoke, edged with pain. "You pulled me out of the drift." Not a question, an accusation. "I wasn't going to let you die on my porch," she said, surprised at how steady she sounded. "Even if you did try to bite Tom's hand off." A flicker of something, amusement or shame, crossed his face. He pushed up on one elbow, winced, and the movement pulled the makeshift bandage tight across his ribs. Fresh red seeped through the linen. "Lie still," she snapped, dropping to her knees beside him without thinking. "You'll tear the stitches." His gaze tracked her every move as she reached for the cloth and basin of hot water. When her fingers brushed the bare skin of his side, he went rigid, every muscle locking. A low growl rumbled in his chest, so deep she felt it in her bones. Elara froze. "I'm not going to hurt you." "You already did," he rasped. "Smells like silver in that needle." Her breath caught. "How did you—" "I'd know that burn anywhere." His eyes narrowed. "Who are you, little human? Living alone on the edge of Blackwood territory with silver in her sewing kit?" The question hung between them like a blade. She sat back on her heels, wiping her hands on her apron to hide the tremor. "Elara Voss, this is my cabin, my land, and you're the one who showed up bleeding and half dead." Chapter 3. The Weight of Names. The fire had settled into glowing coals when he spoke again. "Elara Voss," he repeated, tasting the syllables like wine he wasn't sure he trusted. That's a lonely name for a woman living alone on the edge of the world. Elara didn't look at him. She was wringing blood-warm water from a rag, the basin between her knees pink and cloudy. The storm had quieted to a soft, relentless hiss against the roof. "It's the name I have left," she said. "The rest got taken." A pause. She felt his gaze on the side of her face, heavy as a hand. "I am called Rowan," he said at last. "Rowan Blackwood." The rag slipped from her fingers and plopped into the water. Blackwood. The name carved into the oldest stones in the valley. The name whispered by frightened children and drunken trappers alike. The family that had vanished from the manor house 3 generations ago, leaving only rumors of wolves and bloodlines too strange for daylight. She turned slowly. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't read, something between wariness and resignation. "You're a long way from the manor, Rowan Blackwood," she said, voice low. "Some of us never left." His mouth twisted, not quite a smile. "Some of us can't." He tried to push upright again. This time the pain dropped him back with a hiss through clenched teeth. Sweat beaded along his hairline, catching the firelight, like tiny sparks. "Stop moving," Elara ordered. She crawled closer, knees brushing the bare skin, and pressed 2 fingers to the pulse hammering at his throat. Too fast. Too hot. "You're burning up." "Silver poisoning," he muttered. "Your needle was tipped with it." Guilt stabbed her. "I keep it for protection. Things come down from the ridge sometimes." "Things," he echoed, a rough laugh that ended in a cough. "You have no idea." His skin was furnace hot under her palm. Without thinking, she slid her hand to the nape of his neck, lifting his head just enough to tip a cup of willow bark tea between his lips. He swallowed once, twice, then turned his face into the cradle of her wrist, breathing her in like a drowning man breaking the surface. Elara went very still. Rowan's eyes were closed, lashes dark against the pallor of his cheeks. For a moment he looked almost human, almost broken. His next words were so soft she felt them more than heard them. "You smell like pine needles and courage, and grief older than you are." Her throat closed. She tried to pull away. His hand came up and closed around her wrist, not tight, just enough to anchor her there. His palm engulfed hers completely. Calluses, scars, strength that could have crushed her bones but didn't. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, echoing her earlier words. "Not tonight." The fire popped. A log collapsed in a shower of sparks. She should have been terrified. Instead, something inside her chest unknotted, just a little. "Tell me what you are," she whispered. Rowan opened his eyes. In the low light, they flickered between hazel and molten gold, as though the wolf paced just behind the man, listening. "Not yet." His thumb swept once across the frantic pulse in her wrist. "Some truths have teeth. You're not ready for the bite." He let her go, and she sat back, heart ricocheting against her ribs. The space where his hand had been felt cold suddenly, abandoned. Silence stretched, thick and dangerous. Outside, the wind had died entirely. The world felt paused, waiting. Elara found her voice. "You said you'd know Silver anywhere. That means you've been hunted before." Rowan's gaze slid away to the flames. "More times than I have years." "By who?" "Everyone." A muscle jumped in his jaw. "My own kind most of all." The words hung between them, brutal and bare. She saw the flicker of old rage in his eyes, and beneath it something rawer, exhaustion that went soul deep. Without permission, her hand moved, settling lightly over the bandage on his ribs. "These wounds weren't from a bear." "No." His voice dropped to a growl that vibrated through her palm. "They were from my brother." The confession struck her like a slap. She searched his face for a lie and found none. "Why?" she breathed. "Because I wouldn't let him slaughter an entire human town to prove a point." His lips peeled back from teeth too sharp for a moment. "Because I still believe some lines shouldn't be crossed, even when the moon demands blood." Elara's breath trembled out of her. She thought of the stories. Entire hunting parties vanishing, livestock torn apart, children found miles from home with no memory of how they got there. She had always assumed the worst of the beast in the woods. Maybe the truth was worse. Maybe it was more complicated. Rowan's eyes closed again. The fever was climbing. She could feel it rolling off him in waves. "Sleep," she said softly. "I'll keep watch." A humorless sound escaped him. "You think you can guard me, little human?" "I dragged you through a blizzard," she reminded him. "I stitched you with silver, and you're still breathing. I think I'm managing." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. His hand found hers again, guided it to rest over his heart. Beneath muscle and bone it thundered, wild and alive. "Then guard this too," he murmured, voice fading as fever pulled him under. It's been a long time since anyone bothered. Elara stayed there long after his breathing evened out, her palm trapped beneath his much larger one, feeling the steady, impossible beat against her skin. She told herself it was only to monitor the fever. She was lying. Somewhere in the dark hours before dawn, Rowan shifted in his sleep and curled toward her warmth. His forehead came to rest against her knee, black hair spilling across her thigh like ink. One of his arms slid around her hips, not possessive, just seeking an anchor. Elara didn't move. She sat frozen, afraid to breathe, afraid to hope. The fire burned low. Snow tapped gently at the windows like a warning she no longer wanted to heed. She threaded her fingers, very carefully through his hair. Whatever he was, whatever storm he carried inside him, for this one night she would keep the darkness at bay. Outside, far up the ridge, a lone wolf howled, long and mournful, and the sound carried a name she didn't yet know how to fear. Rowan's grip tightened in his sleep, as though even unconscious he answered the call, and refused it. Elara felt the tremor run through him and pressed closer, offering the only thing she had left to give. The warmth of a heart that had forgotten how to trust, beginning, against all reason, to remember. Chapter 4. Things the Firelight Shows. Dawn came in pale, bruised streaks through the shutters, and Elara woke with a crick in her neck and Rowan's head still heavy on her thigh. She hadn't meant to fall asleep. She had meant to stay vigilant, to keep one hand near the silver knife on the mantel. Instead, she had slumped sideways against the stone hearth, one palm still buried in the thick silk of his hair, the other curled loosely over the steady drum of his heart. He was cooler now. The fever had broken sometime before first light. His breathing was deep, even, almost peaceful. In sleep, the sharp edges of his face softened. He looked younger than the ancient sorrow in his eyes had suggested. A man, not a myth. Elara eased her cramped legs and tried to slip away. His arm, still draped across her hips, tightened reflexively, a low rumble vibrating through his chest. Not quite a growl, more a sound of protest. She froze. After a moment, the arm relaxed again, but his fingers found the hem of her wool sweater and held on as though afraid she would vanish with the night. Something hot and inconvenient lodged behind her ribs. She studied the place where his dark hand lay against the faded green wool. The contrast was stark. His skin sun-browned and scarred, hers pale and ink-stained from years of bookkeeping she would never return to. A lifetime ago, she had balanced ledgers for a man who smiled while he stole her future. Now she balanced the weight of a stranger who might destroy what little she had left. And still her fingers moved without permission, stroking through his hair again, tracing the shell of his ear, the sharp line of his jaw. He made a sound almost like a purr, leaned into the touch, and Elara's heart performed a treacherous somersault. She was in trouble. The realization struck just as Rowan's lashes lifted. Hazel eyes, clearer now, met hers at close range. For a breathless second, neither of them moved. Then the corner of his mouth curved, slow and devastating. "Morning, little Wolfguard," he murmured, voice rough with sleep. Heat flooded her cheeks. She tried to pull away. His fingers tightened on her sweater. "Don't," he said quietly. "Not yet." The gentleness in his tone undid her more than any command could have. She stayed where she was, pinned by nothing more than two softly spoken words. Rowan pushed up slowly, wincing as stitches pulled. He didn't release her sweater. When he was sitting, their knees touched, the bare skin warm between them. "You stayed all night," he said. "You had a fever. You could have tied me up, drugged me, put that silver knife through my heart the moment I passed out." "I considered it," she admitted. His smile widened, revealing the faintest hint of elongated canine. "But you didn't." "No?" He studied her face with an intensity that felt like being hunted in slow motion. "Why?" Elara opened her mouth and found no clever answer. Only the truth, raw and unsteady. "Because you looked at me like I was the first safe thing you'd seen in years," she whispered. "And I know what that feels like." Something fractured behind his eyes. For a moment the mask slipped entirely, and she saw the depth of the loneliness he carried, vast as the forest outside, ancient as the mountains. Rowan's hand lifted, hesitated, then cupped her cheek with a tenderness that belied the strength in his fingers. His thumb brushed the corner of her mouth, tracing the place where she had bitten, her lip raw during the night. "Elara," he said, and her name in his rough voice sounded like a prayer and a curse at once. "You should have left me in the snow." "But I didn't," she echoed his earlier words. "No," he agreed, voice dropping to a growl that wasn't entirely human. "And now I'm in your blood, and you're in mine." The air between them thickened, charged like the moment before lightning. She felt it under her skin, an awareness that had nothing to do with reason. Her pulse thundered in her ears, his nostrils flared as though he could taste it. He leaned in, slow enough that she could have stopped him. She didn't. His forehead rested against hers. They breathed the same small space of air, pine smoke and blood and something wilder. His hand slid from her cheek to the nape of her neck, cradling her like something fragile and priceless. "I won't lie to you," he whispered against her lips. "I'm dangerous. More than you can imagine. If you let me stay—" "I already let you stay," she cut in, the words trembling. "You're here. You're breathing. That part's done." A shaky laugh escaped him. "Brave woman." "Terrified woman," she corrected. His thumb stroked the frantic pulse beneath her ear. "Terrified is wiser." Outside, a branch cracked under the weight of snow. Both of them tensed. Rowan's head snapped toward the window, eyes flaring bright gold. A snarl built in his chest, low and lethal. Elara's hand shot to his wrist. "It's just the storm settling." He didn't relax. His gaze swept the room, nostrils flaring as he scented the air. "They're looking for me," he said, so quietly she almost missed it. "They'll come here." Fear slid cold fingers down her spine. "Who?" Rowan's jaw clenched. He looked at her for a long moment, torn. "My brother," he said finally. "Caius. The wounds you stitched. He gave them to me when I refused to let him burn the valley to prove his strength. He won't stop until he drags me back in chains or leaves me dead." Elara swallowed. "And if he finds you here?" Rowan's eyes bled fully gold, the beast rising close to the surface. "Then he finds you, too." The threat hung between them, ugly and real. She should have been screaming, shoving him out the door, barring it behind him. Instead, she heard herself ask, "How long until he gets here?" Rowan's gaze softened, something like awe flickering across his face. "A day, maybe 2. The storm slowed them." "Then we have a day." She stood, brushing soot from her jeans, and crossed to the small kitchen nook. "You need food. Broth first, then meat if your stomach can take it. And I need coffee if I'm going to think." Rowan watched her, stunned. "Elara." "You can tell me the rest while I cook," she said over her shoulder. voice steadier than she felt. All of it. No more half-truths. If wolves are coming to my door, I deserve to know why. She felt his stare on her back like a touch. When he spoke, his voice was raw. You're not what I expected from a human. She glanced back, managed a crooked smile. You're not what I expected from a monster. Something warm and fierce lit his eyes. He rose, swaying only once, and crossed the room in 3 silent strides. Before she could protest, he caught her face in both hands and pressed a kiss to her forehead, hard, reverent, trembling. Thank you, he said against her skin, for not leaving me in the snow. Elara closed her eyes, breathed him in, pine and blood and storm, and felt the first thread of something unbreakable begin to weave itself between their hearts. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the distant, eager howl of wolves on the hunt. Inside, the fire crackled brighter, and neither of them moved apart. Chapter 5. Salt and Truth. The scent of venison stew filled the small cabin, rich and dark, curling like wood smoke around them. Elara stirred the pot with more focus than it required, using the rhythm to steady her hands. Rowan sat at the scarred pine table, shirtless because the bandages needed changing again, and every time she glanced up she found his gaze on her. Quiet, patient, hungry in a way that had nothing to do with food. She set a bowl in front of him. Steam rose between them like a veil. Eat, she said. Then talk. Rowan wrapped both hands around the bowl as if warmth itself were a novelty. He drank the broth first, eyes half closed, a low sound of gratitude rumbling in his chest. When he tore into the meat, it was with the restrained savagery of someone who had forgotten what it felt like to be cared for. Elara sat opposite, cradling her own bowl but not tasting it. She waited. He wiped his mouth with the back of his wrist and began. The Blackwood pack has ruled these mountains for 4 centuries, he said. Longer, maybe. The stories humans tell, curses, moon madness, bargains with devils, are only echoes. The truth is simpler and uglier. We are born this way. Blood remembers. He turned the bowl slowly between his palms. Every generation, the moon chooses one of us to carry the crown. The Rex Luporum, the Wolf King. Strength, speed, lifespan, everything is magnified. The pack is bound to obey. The land itself answers. His mouth twisted. My father wore the crown until Caius cut his throat the night I turned 25. Tradition says the crown passes by blood or by death. Caius wanted it sooner. Elara's spoon stilled halfway to her lips. And you? I was supposed to challenge him the proper way, on the next solstice, before the elders. Instead, I walked away. Rowan's gaze lifted to hers, steady and unflinching. I refused to spill my own brother's blood for a throne that drinks its kings dry, so he tried to spill mine first. Silence stretched, broken only by the soft pop of burning pine. She found her voice. You're the rightful king. I'm the one the moon marked, he corrected gently. There's a difference. He pushed up from the table, restless, and paced to the window. Snow had begun again, fat, lazy flakes drifting past the glass. His reflection stared back at him. Broad shoulders, scarred torso, eyes too old for the face they lived in. Caius believes mercy is weakness, he continued, voice low. He wants war with the human world. Wants to drag us back to the old days when villages paid tribute in livestock and silence. I've spent 7 years keeping him leashed. Every time I pull him back, he hates me more. Elara rose and went to stand behind him. She didn't touch him yet, but she was close enough that the heat of her body brushed his bare back. And the wounds I stitched? Rowan's shoulders tensed. 3 nights ago, he cornered me on the sacred ridge, told me the leash was off. that if I wouldn't lead the slaughter, he'd take the crown and burn every human settlement from here to the coast, starting with the valley towns. When I refused, he shifted and attacked. I barely got away. His voice cracked on the last word, so slightly she almost missed it. Elara laid her palm between his shoulder blades. The skin there was fever-warm again, muscles knotted tight. He shuddered under the touch. "I'm tired, Elara," he whispered to the glass. "Tired of burying friends who followed the wrong brother. Tired of pretending I'm strong enough to hold this alone." She slid her arms around his waist from behind, pressing her cheek to the bare skin of his back. His heart thundered against her forearms. "You're not alone tonight," she said against his spine. Rowan turned in the circle of her arms, slow, as though afraid she'd vanish if he moved too fast. When they were face to face, he searched her eyes. "You still don't understand what I am. I understand you bled on my floor and let me stitch you with silver rather than hurt me," she answered. "I understand you're trying to keep people, human people, safe from your own brother. That's enough for now." His hands rose to frame her face, thumbs stroking the hollows beneath her eyes where exhaustion had painted faint shadows. "You asked what the wolf felt when you dragged him through the snow," he said, voice rough. "It felt home. For the first time in years, it felt home." Elara's breath caught. Something vast and terrifying opened inside her chest, a space she had boarded up after every betrayal. Rowan bent his head until their foreheads touched again. "There's a word in the old tongue," he murmured. "Lunaris vinculum, the moon bond. When a wolf finds the one soul the moon braided to his own, before either of them drew breath." His voice dropped to a reverent whisper. "I felt it the moment your scent hit me in the snow. Like stepping out of a grave into sunlight." She tried to laugh, but it came out shaky. "You're saying I'm saying the moon is rarely gentle," he cut in fiercely. "And never wrong. But I will never force it on you. Never take the choice." His eyes had gone fully gold again, luminous with emotion he was barely holding leashed. Elara reached up and traced the sharp line of his cheekbone, the stubble that had grown overnight. "I've had choices taken from me before," she said quietly. "By people who swore they loved me. Don't ever do that." "Never," he vowed, and the word carried weight, like an oath carved into stone. Outside, the wind shifted. A new scent threaded through the cracks around the door. Cold iron, wet fur, and something darker. Rowan went rigid. "They're closer than I thought," he growled. Elara followed his gaze to the window. Through the swirling snow, distant shapes moved between the trees, too large for natural wolves, too silent. Rowan stepped in front of her instinctively, shielding her with his body. "How many?" she asked, surprised at how calm she sounded. 5, maybe 6. Caius sent the enforcers." His hands flexed, claws pricking at the ends of his fingers before he forced them back. "They'll circle first, test the wards." "Wards?" She arched a brow. "Old blood magic woven into the foundations of this cabin. Your aunt wasn't as human as the valley thought." A grim smile. "It'll hide us for a little while. Not long." Elara looked at the silver knife on the counter, then at the man in front of her, bleeding again through his bandages, swaying from exhaustion, still ready to fight an army for her doorstep. She made a decision. "Then we don't waste the time we have," she said. Rowan turned, eyes widening as she took his hand and pulled him toward the narrow staircase that led to the loft. "Elara, you said the bond can't be forced," she said over her shoulder. "But it can be chosen. Tonight I choose not to be afraid of you." She stopped at the top of the stairs, moonlight spilling through the single round window and washing them both silver. Rowan stood one step below, bringing their eyes level. His breathing was ragged. "I'm still half wild with moon fever," he warned, voice shaking. "If I lose control, then I'll remind you who you are," she said simply, and kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, a question. Then Rowan made a broken sound and answered with everything he'd been holding back. Hunger, gratitude, terror, hope. His arms crushed her close, her fingers buried in his hair. The kiss turned desperate, tasting of salt and stew and unspoken promises. When they broke apart, foreheads pressed together, both of them trembling. "Whatever comes at dawn," she whispered against his mouth, "we face it together." Rowan closed his eyes, breathing her in like she was the only oxygen left in the world. "Together," he echoed, and the words sounded like salvation. Below them, the fire settled into embers. Outside, the wolves began to circle. Chapter 6. The Quiet. Before the Teeth. The loft was small and dark, lit only by the moon spilling through the round window and the faint glow of embers drifting up the stairwell. The bed was narrow, an old iron frame Elara's aunt had slept in alone for 50 years. Tonight it would hold two people who had both forgotten what it felt like to be wanted. Rowan paused at the top step, one hand braced on the low beam. Blood had begun to seep through the fresh bandage again. The climb had cost him. He looked suddenly uncertain, as though the kiss downstairs had used up the last of his courage. Elara saw it and stepped close. She took the hem of his torn shirt, her shirt now, one of her flannel spares, and lifted it gently over his head. He let her. When the fabric cleared his face, his eyes were pure gold, pupils blown wide. "I need to see how bad it is," she said, voice steady even while her heart rattled against her ribs. Rowan exhaled, a shaky sound, and turned so she could unwrap the linen. The stitches held, but the skin around them was angry red, fever hot again. She pressed 2 fingers to the worst slash and felt him tremble. "Lie down," she murmured. He obeyed, stretching out on the quilt like a man awaiting judgment. Moonlight carved silver across the ridges and valleys of his body. Old scars, new wounds, the shadowed line of hair that disappeared beneath borrowed sweatpants. He was beautiful in the way a storm is beautiful, dangerous, and inevitable. Elara fetched the small tin of salve her aunt had made from wolfsbane and yarrow. Ironic now, and knelt beside him. She worked in silence, smoothing the ointment over torn flesh. Every time her fingers brushed his skin, he flinched, then leaned into the touch like a creature starved for gentleness. When she finished, she didn't move away. She stayed on her knees beside the bed, hands resting on the quilt near his hip. Rowan caught one of her wrists, brought her palm to his lips, and pressed a kiss to the center that felt like a brand. "I have never lain in a human bed," he said against her skin. "Never let anyone tend me like this. Never wanted to." Elara's throat tightened. First time for everything. He tugged gently until she stretched out beside him. The mattress dipped, their bodies fit together with the ease of puzzle pieces that had been lost for years. She ended up tucked against his uninjured side, her head on his shoulder, one of his arms locked around her waist like he was afraid the moon itself might steal her. For a long time they simply breathed. The cabin creaked around them, old wood settling. Far below, the fire hissed its last. "Tell me something true," she whispered into the dark. "Something you've never said aloud." Rowan was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, when I was 12, Caius held my head under the ice of the sacred spring because I cried when he killed a deer that still had spots. His voice was flat, stripped of emotion the way only old pain can be. He said tears made me weak. That night I learned to swallow them so deep I forgot the taste. Elara's hand curled into a fist against his chest. She felt the tremor that ran through him, the wolf snarling silently at the memory. "I'm glad you told me," she said, "and I hope he chokes on every tear you never shed." A surprised huff of laughter escaped him. He pressed his lips to her hair. "Your turn," he murmured. She swallowed. "When Marcus, my ex, cleaned out my accounts, he left a note. It said, 'You were always too soft to keep what was yours.' I believed him for 2 years. I still flinch when someone raises their voice." Rowan's arm tightened until she could feel his heartbeat against her ribs. Slow, steady, furious on her behalf. "Marcus was a coward," he growled. "And wrong. You dragged a dying wolf through a blizzard because softness and strength are not opposites, Elara. They're the same damn thing, worn differently." She turned her face into his neck, breathing him in. Pine, blood, wood smoke, safety. Tears pricked her eyes, sudden and mortifying. He felt them against his skin and made a low, soothing sound, half human, half wolf. His hands stroked down her spine, slow, reverent. "Let them fall here," he whispered. "I will catch everyone." So she did. Quiet, aching tears for the girl who had trusted the wrong man, for the woman who had hidden in these mountains to lick her wounds. Rowan held her through it without platitudes, without rushing. He simply anchored her to the earth with the weight of his arms and the steady thunder of his heart. When the storm inside her quieted, she lifted her head. Moonlight painted silver tracks on her cheeks. Rowan brushed them away with his thumbs, then replaced them with soft kisses. Temple, cheekbone, the corner of her mouth. "I'm not fixed," she warned, voice raw. "Neither am I," he answered. "We'll be broken together. It's quieter that way." She laughed, watery but real, and kissed him. This time there was no desperation, only a slow, deliberate exploration. His lips were warm, careful, tasting faintly of salt and venison and her own tears. When her tongue brushed his, he groaned softly and let her set the pace. Gentle, unhurried, a conversation made of breaths and small sounds. They undressed each other the way people disarm bombs, reverently, aware one wrong move could shatter everything. Every new scar he revealed, she kissed. Every flinch she gave when his hands skimmed the faint bruises Marcus had left on her upper arms, Rowan paused and waited for permission before touching again. When they were skin to skin beneath the quilt, he rested his forehead against hers. "Tell me to stop and I will," he said, voice ragged. "Even if it kills me." Elara answered by guiding his hand to her heart, letting him feel how steadily it beat for him now. "Don't stop," she whispered. "Just go slow. I want to remember every second of choosing this." So he did. Slow, deliberate worship, mouth-mapping collarbone, fingers learning the curve of her waist, breath catching every time she arched into him. When he finally slid inside her, they both stilled, overwhelmed. He buried his face in her neck and shuddered. "Elara," he breathed, like her name was the only prayer he knew. She wrapped her legs around him and held on as they moved together, careful, then deeper, then urgent, but never reckless. The moon watched through the window, full and ancient and approving. Outside, the wolves circled closer, their footfalls muffled by snow, but inside time narrowed to the slide of skin, the catch of breath, the moment when two shattered souls recognized their matching edges and chose to fit anyway. Afterward, they lay tangled and sweat-damp, her head on his chest, his fingers drawing idle patterns along her spine. "The bond is singing," he murmured into her hair, wonder in his voice. "I can feel you in my blood like starlight." Elara pressed a kiss over his heart. "Good," she said fiercely, "because I'm keeping you." A low, reverent growl vibrated through his chest. He rolled them so she was tucked beneath him again, safe, sheltered, claimed without a single mark on her skin. "Sleep," he whispered. "I'll keep watch now." She was already drifting, lulled by the steady rhythm of his breathing and the distant, fading howl of wolves that suddenly sounded less certain. Just before darkness took her, she felt Rowan press his lips to the pulse beneath her ear and whisper words in a language older than the mountains. The moon listened, the wolves listened, and somewhere beyond the tree line, Caius snarled and tasted the first bitter edge of fear. Chapter 7. The Mark That Wasn't Forced. Elara woke to the hush that comes just before violence. The loft was still dark, the moon set, the fire long dead. Rowan was already sitting on the edge of the bed, back to her, shoulders carved from stone. Every muscle stood out in sharp relief, as though the wolf inside him had stretched the man's skin too tight. She knew, without asking, that the waiting was over. "They're here," he said, voice barely a breath. "At the edge of the wards." Caius brought more than enforcers this time. He brought the elders. Elara sat up, pulling the quilt to her chest. The air tasted metallic, like the moment before lightning. "How many?" "Enough." He turned then, and the look on his face cracked something inside her. Regret, fierce and absolute. "I should have left at dusk. I should never have—" She crossed the small space in 2 strides and pressed her fingers to his lips. "Stop. You needed healing. I needed—" She swallowed. "I needed to remember I was still allowed to want someone. We don't get to rewrite last night because dawn is cruel." Rowan closed his eyes, leaning into her touch as though it were the only thing tethering him to sanity. When he opened them again, the gold had swallowed the hazel entirely. "They'll demand I return," he said, "or they'll burn this cabin with both of us inside it. The wards are old. They won't hold against the full council." Elara felt the cold seep through the floorboards, but she refused to shiver. "Then we meet them outside, on our terms." He stared at her as if she had suggested walking into fire holding hands. "Elara, I'm not hiding while you face them alone." She was already pulling on clothes, thick socks, jeans, the heavy wool sweater that still carried his scent. "If they want you, they'll have to go through me first." A tremor ran through him. He caught her hands, brought them to his mouth, kissed her knuckles with desperate reverence. "You are the bravest thing I have ever known," he whispered, "and the most terrifying." Downstairs, she brewed coffee with shaking hands while Rowan dressed the wounds one last time. He moved with lethal grace despite the pain, every motion precise, contained. When he pulled on the black thermal she had laid out for him, it stretched across shoulders that suddenly seemed too large for her small human world. They stood at the door together. Dawn was a thin bruise on the horizon, the forest silent in the way of held breath. Rowan reached for the latch, then stopped. "There's one more thing," he said quietly. He took her left hand and turned it palm up. With the claw of his index finger, extended just enough to prick, he drew a single, deliberate line across the pad of her thumb. A bead of blood welled, bright and perfect. Elara didn't flinch. Rowan pressed his own thumb to the cut until their blood mingled, then brought it to his lips. He tasted them both, eyes fluttering shut as though the flavor were sacred. "In the old law," he said, voice rough, "a willing bond, sealed in shared blood and spoken vow, cannot be broken by any king or council. It is older than the crown, older than the moon herself." He met her eyes, steady and terrified and hopeful. "Elara Voss," he said formally, "do you take me, beast, exile, broken king, as your mate, of your own free will, knowing what I am?" Her heart thundered so loudly she was sure the wolves outside could hear it. This was forever. This was choosing the storm instead of hiding from it. She rose on her toes and kissed him, soft, certain, tasting copper and coffee in them. I do, she answered against his mouth. And you, Rowan Blackwood, take me. Human, stubborn, previously terrible at trusting. As your mate? A broken laugh escaped him. Until the stars burn out. He sliced his own thumb, pressed it to her lips. She tasted him without hesitation, wild, metallic, alive. Something inside her chest flared bright and hot, like a second heartbeat waking up. Rowan shuddered, head falling to her shoulder. It's done, he breathed. They'll smell it on us both now. Elara felt it, a thread of molten gold beneath her ribs, tugging gently toward him. Not a chain, a tether, a promise. Outside, a howl rose, close, impatient, edged with fury. Rowan straightened, the uncertainty gone. In its place stood the Wolf King, shoulders squared, eyes blazing. He opened the door. Snow had stopped. The clearing in front of the cabin was full of wolves, 12, maybe 15, massive beasts in shades of gray and black and winter white. At their center stood a man as tall as Rowan, broader, blonde where Rowan was dark, eyes the cold silver of a blade. Caius. Rowan stepped over the threshold first, placing himself between Elara and the pack. She followed, chin high, blood still warm on her tongue. Caius's nostrils flared. His gaze snapped to her, then to the faint red line on Rowan's thumb, and finally to the matching mark on hers. Rage twisted his features into something monstrous. You bonded a human? He snarled. Have you lost what little mind you had left? Rowan's voice rolled out, deep and ancient, laced with power that made the air itself shiver. By blood and vow, witnessed by the moon, she is mine. Harm her, and you challenge the oldest law we have. Even you are not above it, brother. The elders, 3 ancient wolves with silver muzzles, shifted uneasily. One stepped forward, voice like gravel. The bond is valid, the elder rumbled. We smelled it form. Caius bared teeth that were already lengthening. She is prey. She has no place. She has every place. Rowan cut in, and the growl beneath his words made several younger wolves whine and drop their bellies to the snow. She dragged your dying king from a drift and stitched him with silver rather than let him bleed out. She stood over him with a knife in her hand and chose mercy. That is the heart you call prey. Elara stepped to Rowan's side, not behind him, and met Caius's stare. I'm not asking for your approval, she said clearly. I'm telling you what is. He's mine. I'm his. Step onto my land again without invitation, and you'll learn exactly how unforgiving a human woman can be. A ripple went through the pack. Shock, amusement, something dangerously close to respect. Caius's eyes promised murder, but the elders were already turning away, melting back into the trees. Without their sanction, he could not force the issue. Not today. He spat into the snow. This isn't over, brother. The crown is still mine to take. Rowan smiled, sharp and cold. Come try, Caius. But next time you hunt me, remember whose blood sings in my veins now. Caius shifted in a blur of fur and rage, vanishing into the forest with the remaining enforcers at his heels. The clearing emptied until only the scent of their anger lingered. Rowan sagged the moment they were gone, pain and exhaustion crashing over him. Elara caught him before his knees hit the snow, wrapping her arms around his waist. Inside, the cabin felt different, smaller, safer, theirs. He leaned heavily against the closed door, forehead pressed to hers. I thought I'd have to watch you die for me, he whispered. Not today, she answered and kissed the corner of his mouth. Today you get breakfast and more stitches. A shaky laugh escaped him. Bossy mate. You have no idea. He cupped her face, eyes soft gold again. I meant my vow, Elara. Until the stars burn out. She leaned into his palm. Good. Because I'm keeping you forever, Rowan Blackwood. Get used to it. Outside, the sun finally broke over the ridge, spilling light across the snow like forgiveness. Inside, two hearts beat in perfect stubborn unison. Human and wolf, exile and anchor, beginning the long, fierce work of choosing each other every single day. But in the distance, Caius's howl rose again, distant, furious, and far from finished. Chapter 8. The Secret Beneath the Scars. The sun climbed higher, turning the snow into a blinding mirror, but inside the cabin the light felt softer, almost reverent. Rowan sat on the edge of the hearth while Elara peeled away the blood-crusted bandage for the third time that morning. His breathing was shallow. The fight with Caius had torn half the stitches loose again. She worked in silence, cleaning, repacking the wounds with yarrow and honey. Her fingers steady even when they brushed the raised silver scars that laced his ribs like lightning frozen mid-strike. Rowan watched her face instead of the wounds. "You're getting good at this," he said quietly. "I'm getting tired of seeing you bleed," she answered without looking up. He caught her wrist gently, stopping her. "Look at me." She did. His eyes were hazel again, human and exhausted and unbearably tender. "I need to tell you the rest," he said, "before Caius comes back with something worse than teeth." Elara set the salve aside and sat cross-legged on the bearskin in front of him, close enough that their knees touched. "Then tell me." Rowan drew a slow breath. "The crown isn't just power. It's a curse older than the pack itself. Every wolf king is bound to the land by blood and bone. When the moon is full, the land drinks from him. Strength, years, sanity, until he either breaks or is broken. My father lasted 37 years before it hollowed him out. He begged Caius to kill him in the end." Elara's stomach turned cold. "And you?" "I've been fighting it since the night I was marked." He lifted the hair at the nape of his neck, turning so she could see the scar hidden there. A perfect circle of raised tissue, black against his skin, shaped like a full moon. The Luna Sigil. It burns when the moon is high and the land is hungry. The only thing that slows the drain is a true mate bond. A second heart to share the burden. He let his hair fall and faced her again, expression raw. "That's why Caius is desperate. He feels the land eating him alive already. He stole the crown without the sigil's consent, and it's killing him faster. He thinks if he kills me and severs our bond before it fully roots, he can steal you instead, force the bond to transfer." Elara felt the blood leave her face. "Can he?" "No," Rowan said fiercely. "A willing bond cannot be stolen. But he can kill you trying, and he will." Silence settled, thick with the scent of honey and iron. Elara reached out and traced the black moon scar with one careful fingertip. Rowan shivered. "How long do you have?" she asked. "If the bond stays shallow, months. If it deepens..." He swallowed. "Years. Maybe decades. I don't know. No king in memory has ever had a human mate. The stories say the moon either accepts the pairing and rewrites the curse, or it destroys us both." She met his eyes, unflinching. "Then we make the moon accept us." A broken laugh escaped him. "Just like that?" "Just like that." She took his hand and pressed it over her own heart. "Feel this. It's not going anywhere. Not tonight. Not ever." Rowan closed his eyes, feeling the steady beat beneath his palm, and something inside him cracked open like spring ice on a river. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "Probably not," she said, soft and teasing. "But you're stuck with me anyway?" He pulled her into his lap then, careful of his ribs, and buried his face in her hair. She felt the tremor that ran through him, relief, terror, gratitude so deep it had no name. They stayed like that until the sun reached the windows and painted them gold, Later, when the worst of the bleeding had stopped, Elara made them tea strong enough to wake the dead. Rowan wrapped a quilt around both of them and pulled her down onto the couch. She curled against his good side, head on his chest, listening to the double rhythm of his heart. One human, one something wilder. "Ask me anything," he murmured into her hair. "No more secrets." She thought for a long moment. "When you were hurt in the snow," she said slowly, "why didn't you shift to heal faster?" Rowan's arm tightened around her. "Because I was ashamed." She lifted her head. "Of what?" "Of needing help. Of being weak enough to need a human." His voice cracked. "I thought if I stayed wolf, I could crawl away and die with some dignity. Then you looked at me with those fierce eyes and told me I was safe, and I couldn't leave you. The wolf chose to live because you asked him to." Elara felt tears threaten again and blinked them back. She pressed her lips to the Luna Sigil at the base of his throat, soft, deliberate. "I'm glad you stayed," she whispered against his skin. Rowan made a sound like a prayer and held her closer. Outside, the day slipped toward afternoon. The forest was quiet. No birds, no wind, the hush that falls when predators are near. Rowan's head lifted, his nostrils flared. "They're still out there," he said. "Not Caius. Scouts, waiting for night." Elara sat up. "Then we don't give them night." She crossed to the old trunk in the corner, her aunt's trunk, and opened it with the key she wore around her neck. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a short sword of blackened silver and a necklace of wolf teeth strung on red cord. Rowan's breath caught. "Where did you get those?" "My aunt wasn't just a recluse," Elara said grimly. "She was a Voss. There's old blood on my mother's side too. Wolf friend, some called it. Others called it traitor. She kept these for the day the pack remembered we existed." She lifted the sword. The blade hummed faintly, hungry. Rowan stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. "You never told me you carried ward blood." "You never told me you were the moon-cursed king," she countered, arching a brow. "We're even." A reluctant smile tugged at his mouth. He took the necklace when she offered it, running the teeth through his fingers. "These belong to the last human the pack ever accepted as mate," he said softly. 300 years ago. She saved the king and broke a curse. Then the pack killed her for it." Elara fastened the cord around her own throat. The teeth settled cold against her collarbone. "Then let's remind them how that story ends when the human fights back," she said. Rowan rose, wincing, and pulled her into his arms. For a long moment he simply held her, breathing her in like oxygen. "Whatever comes tonight," he said against her temple, "I need you to promise me something. Name it. If it looks like Caius will take you, run. The bond will hurt me, but I'll survive it. You won't survive him." Elara pulled back just far enough to meet his eyes. "No," she said simply. "Elara, I said no." She cupped his face, thumbs stroking the sharp lines of his cheekbones. "I didn't drag you out of the snow to lose you in it. We rise together or we fall together. That's the deal." His eyes searched hers, desperate, terrified, proud. Then he kissed her, hard, claiming, a vow sealed in heat and teeth and trembling breath. When they broke apart, both of them were shaking. Outside, the sun dipped toward the ridge, and the shadows between the pines grew long and watchful. Inside, the fire roared back to life under Elara's hands, and the silver sword caught the flames like it had been waiting centuries for this exact night. Rowan took her hand, lacing their fingers, the fresh blood cuts on their thumbs kissing again. "Together," he said. "Together," she echoed. And in the quiet before moonrise, the cabin filled with the sound of two hearts learning how to beat as one. Human and wolf, curse and cure, exile and home, while the forest held its breath and waited for blood. Chapter 9. The Moon's Bargain. Moonrise came like a blade sliding from its sheath. Elara felt it first in the teeth around her neck. They warmed against her skin, then burned, as though remembering old blood. Rowan went rigid beside her, the Luna Sigil at his nape flaring black fire beneath his shirt. He staggered, catching the table's edge with a white-knuckled grip. "It's calling me," he rasped. "The land. It knows the bond is new. It wants to test if it will hold." Elara was already moving. She pressed both palms to his chest, grounding him. "Look at me. Breathe with me." His eyes were molten gold, pupils blown wide, but he obeyed. Inhale, exhale, until the tremor eased and the man wrestled the beast back under control. "I can't shift tonight," he said, voice ragged. "If I do, the curse will drink everything the bond has given me in one gulp. I'll be a rabid thing by dawn." "Then we keep you human," she answered, fierce and certain. "Whatever it takes." She dragged the heavy iron-bound chest from beneath her aunt's bed, the one no one had opened since the old woman died. Inside lay chains of blackened silver, thin as wire but ancient, etched with runes that hurt to look at directly. Rowan's breath hissed when he saw them. "Moon-forged manacles," he whispered. "They'll burn me to the bone." "They'll keep you here," Elara countered. "With me. That's the point." She met his eyes, unflinching. "I trust you, Rowan. Even when you don't trust yourself." Something shattered behind his gaze, centuries of loneliness maybe, or the last wall he'd built around the terrified boy who'd once been held under ice. He nodded once, sharp, and let her lead him to the thick support beam in the center of the room. They worked together in silence. She wrapped the chains around his wrists, crossed them behind the beam, locked them with the old iron key. Every link sizzled where it touched his skin. He didn't make a sound, but sweat beaded on his brow and his breathing turned shallow. When it was done, he stood bound like a sacrifice, shirtless, moonlight pouring over the scars and the fresh burns blooming red across his wrists. Elara cupped his face. "Still with me?" "Always," he said, and the words shook. She kissed him then, slow, deliberate, tasting smoke and pain and unbreakable devotion, until his bound hands flexed uselessly behind the beam, and a broken growl vibrated against her lips. Outside, the first howl rose, closer than any before. Caius had come himself. Elara stepped back, drew the silver sword, and took position between Rowan and the door. The weight of it felt right in her hand, like it had been waiting for her bloodline to claim it again. Rowan's head fell forward, chains clinking. "Elara, please." "No," she said softly. "I told you. Together." The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. Caius filled the frame, half man, half beast, blonde fur rippling over shifting muscle, silver eyes luminous with madness. Behind him, 4 enforcers fanned out, hackles raised. "Little brother," Caius crooned, voice layered with wolfen cruelty. "Chained like the weak thing you are. And your human whore thinks she can play shield?" Rowan snarled, straining against the manacles until blood ran down his forearms. The Luna Sigil blazed black fire, feeding on his rage. Elara raised the sword. "Come take him, then." Caius laughed and lunged. She met him in the center of the room. Steel met claw in a shower of sparks. He was faster than anything human, but the blade sang in her hands, guided by muscle memory that wasn't entirely hers. Her aunt's blood, her ancestors' blood, centuries of women who had stood exactly here and refused to yield. Caius's claws raked across her ribs, tearing cloth and skin. Pain flared white-hot, but she twisted inside his guard and opened a long slash across his chest. Black blood hissed where it met the silver. Behind her, Rowan roared. A sound of pure agony, human and wolf braided together. The chains glowed red. Caius backhanded her. She flew, hit the wall, tasted copper. The sword skittered across the floor. Rowan's voice cracked the air like thunder. Touch her again, and I will end you, crown or no crown. Caius ignored him, stalking toward Elara where she lay dazed. He reached for her throat, and the moon answered. Light, pure, blinding, poured through the shattered door, through every crack in the walls, coalescing around Rowan like liquid starfire. The Luna Sigil ignited. The chains shattered into molten fragments. Rowan stepped forward, no longer man, no longer wolf, but something in between. Taller, broader, eyes twin suns. Power rolled off him in waves that drove the enforcers to their bellies, whining. He spoke, and the voice was layered with every king who had ever worn the curse. Enough. Caius froze, silver eyes wide with animal terror. Rowan crossed the room in 2 strides, lifted his brother by the throat, and slammed him against the wall hard enough to crack stone. You will leave this house, he said, deathly quiet. You will leave my mate, and you will never come back without my permission. The moon has chosen Caius. Feel it. The light pulsed, and Elara felt it too, a golden thread snapping tight between her heart and Rowan's, stronger than steel, brighter than sunlight. The bond flared, fully rooted, irreversible. Caius choked, clawing at the hand around his throat. The madness in his eyes flickered, replaced by raw fear. Rowan leaned close and whispered something, in the old tongue. Caius went limp, terror bleeding from him like water. Rowan released him. Caius fell to his knees, then scrambled backward out the door, shifting as he went, fleeing into the night with his enforcers slinking after. The moonlight dimmed. Rowan swayed. Elara caught him before he hit the floor. The burns on his wrists were deep, bone visible in places, but already knitting closed, faster than before. The bond was feeding him now, sharing strength both ways. She eased him down among the broken chains, cradling his head in her lap. It's over, she whispered, stroking sweat-soaked hair from his forehead. Rowan's eyes found hers, still glowing faintly. The moon accepted you, he breathed, wonder and exhaustion warring in his voice. It rewrote the curse. I felt it choose us both. Elara laughed through tears she hadn't realized were falling. Told you we'd make it behave. He smiled, small, crooked, utterly human, and lifted a shaking hand to touch the wolf-tooth necklace at her throat. My queen, he murmured. The words settled between them like snowfall, quiet, inevitable, eternal. Outside, the forest exhaled. For the first time in centuries, the wind carried no threat. Inside, 2 hearts, scarred, stubborn, impossibly intertwined, beat in perfect rhythm while the moon looked down and, for once, was satisfied. But far away, in the ruins of the old manor, Caius licked his wounds and began to plan something darker than claws. The war was not over. It had only changed shape. Chapter 10. The Crown That Bleeds. The cabin smelled of scorched silver, blood, and pine smoke for 3 days after the moon's judgment. They did not leave it once. Rowan's burns healed into pale, branching scars that looked like lightning frozen across his wrists. Elara's ribs were wrapped in linen. Every breath tugged at the claw marks, but she refused the pain tea after the first night. She wanted to feel everything, proof that they had survived. They moved carefully around each other at first, as if the bond were a living thing that might bruise if handled too roughly. He cooked for her, venison and wild onions, hands trembling from exhaustion. She changed his dressings, fingers lingering on the new scars like she could erase them with tenderness alone. They spoke little, but the silence was soft, full of small touches. His palm at the small of her back when she passed, her cheek against his shoulder while the kettle sang. On the third night, the sky cleared and the temperature plummeted. Ice crackled on the inside of the windows. Rowan built the fire high, then stood staring into it for so long, Elara crossed the room and slipped her arms around his waist from behind. "Talk to me," she said against the warm skin between his shoulder blades. He covered her hands with his. "The elders came while you slept this afternoon. They left a summons carved into the oldest pine." Elara's arms tightened. "And? They want me to take the crown openly. The land is starving, Elara. Crops failed in the valley last summer. Rivers are lower than anyone remembers. The curse is feeding on everything because it was worn by the wrong king for 7 years. His voice cracked. "They say the only way to heal it is for the true Rex Luporum to return, with his mate, at the winter solstice. 3 weeks. She turned him gently to face her. The firelight painted gold across the sharp angles of his face, and the new uncertainty in his eyes. "And if you refuse? Then Caius keeps the crown until it kills him, and everything else with him. The pack fractures. Humans in the valley start dying, of hunger, of sickness, of wolves gone feral from grief." He swallowed hard. "I walked away once to keep from becoming a tyrant. I won't do it again if the cost is measured in innocent blood." Elara studied him for a long moment. "You're asking me to walk into the heart of the pack that wanted me dead 3 nights ago. I'm asking you to stand beside me while I try to save them," he corrected, voice raw. "I won't lie. The risk is obscene. Some will never accept a human queen. Caius still has followers who would gut you for the insult. But the land recognized you, Elara. The moon rewrote the curse for you. That has never happened. Not once in 1,000 years." She felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders like a mantle woven of starlight and knives. "I spent 2 years believing I was too broken to matter to anyone," she said quietly. "Now you're telling me the fate of an entire hidden world rests, in part, on the heart of a woman who once couldn't get out of bed for 3 months. Rowan cupped her face, thumbs stroking the faint bruise still blooming along her cheekbone from Caius's blow. "You dragged a dying wolf king across your threshold and refused to let him go," he said fiercely. "That woman can do anything." Elara closed her eyes, leaned into his touch. "When we go," she whispered, "I want your promise on one thing." "Name it." "If they try to separate us, if they try to cage you again, or hurt you to control me, I burn the whole manor down. I will not lose you to politics or tradition or any other poison wearing a crown." Rowan's breath hitched. He rested his forehead against hers. "Then we burn it together." They sealed it with a kiss that tasted of fire and fear and unbreakable devotion. Later, when the cabin was dark except for the low glow of embers, they lay tangled beneath every quilt she owned. Rowan traced idle patterns along her spine, counting ribs through the bandages. "I have one more secret," he murmured against her temple. Elara's heart stuttered, but she kept her voice steady. "Tell me." "The first time I saw you, truly saw you, was 6 months ago." She went very still. "You used to walk the ridge trail at dusk," he continued softly. "Red coat, hair escaping your braid, talking to the ravens like they answered back. I was tracking rogue wolves near the boundary and I stopped. The wolf refused to move, just watched you until you disappeared." Elara turned in his arms, searching his face in the dim light. "Why didn't you speak?" "Because you looked like peace," he said simply. "And I was war in every breath. I told myself if I stayed away, you would stay safe. Then the moon laughed and bled me half to death at your doorstep." She felt tears threaten and blinked them back. "All those months I thought I was alone up here." "You never were," he whispered. I circled this cabin every night the moon was strong enough to pull me. Left wards at the tree line. Killed 3 rogues who got too close. You just never saw the shadows that kept you breathing. Elara's hand rose to the wolf-tooth necklace, fingers tightening around the largest canine. And now the shadows have a name. Now they have a home, he corrected, voice breaking. She kissed him then, slow, reverent, tasting salt where her tears had slipped free after all. When they parted, she pressed her lips to the Luna Sigil at the base of his throat, feeling it pulse warm beneath her mouth. 3 weeks, she said against his skin. Then we go claim what's ours. Rowan's arms crushed her close, as though the world might tear her away before sunrise. Outside the wind rose, carrying the distant, mournful howl of a lone wolf, no longer threatening, but grieving. The pack felt the shift in the land, the return of balance teetering on a knife's edge. Inside, Elara fell asleep to the steady thunder of Rowan's heart and the quiet certainty that whatever waited at the manor, crown, curse, or war, she would meet it with her hand locked in his and fire in her veins. But in the ruined heart of Blackwood Manor, Caius knelt before an ancient mirror of polished obsidian and whispered to something that had no reflection. The glass rippled. A voice, older than mountains and colder than starlight, answered. The final bargain was struck, and the longest night of winter was still coming.